So far within this SQL tutorial, we have learned a lot of fundamental concepts in SQL, like where clause, group by, having, etc. And we've been doing all these things on the existing table of our DVD rental database that we are using throughout this course. We will try something new today in this lecture, and we will learn how to create database, and within that database, how can we create a new table. After creating a table and defining all the columns, how do we insert records within that table? How can we update values? How can we delete a record if required? And then how can we alter the values within that table? By the end, we will also see how can we finally drop or delete the table or the database. So without any further delay, let's get started, and I'll move into the PG admin on my computer. So I'm on my PG admin, and if you can see just below database, we have two existing databases. One that comes by default with the installation of PG admin, and the other one that we have been using within this playlist. This is the one where we have restored all the information from the DVD rental database. For this lecture, we are going to create a new database. So all we need to do is just select the database, do a right click and hit create, and then select database. We need to name the database here. You can choose a name of your preference. I'm going to name it as learning and then save. So we have created a new database which is absolutely empty at this moment. So if you will expand the schemas, and inside that if you will try to see tables, you will see nothing. It is absolutely empty. So let's try to open the query tool with this newly created database. To start off with today's lecture, we are going to learn how to create a table first. So this is how we start. We say create and then table, and then we enter the name of the table. It can be anything by your choice. I am naming this as student, and then within this parenthesis, we need to enter the values and detail for the columns that we want to have within our table. So I'm using 4 columns within this table. First column name is student ID. After entering the column name, you define the data type within this particular column. So I'm going to use the serial data type. And let me give you a brief information. What does this serial data type do? It will assign a unique value like 1, 2, 3, 4 in a sequence within this student ID column. And we don't have to enter this value manually. Every time we insert a record within the table, this serial data type is going to assign a new value by itself. And next argument is the constants. I hope if you're following this playlist by sequence, then you are already familiar with constants. If not, then please consider checking out our lecture on constants and primary key and foreign key. So I'm defining that my student column, student ID column, is going to be my primary key, and it will be a serial data type. So every time I enter a record, a new student ID will be assigned for each and every record. Next column is name, which is going to be a varchar, and maximum length will be 20. You can change this to any number as per your preference, 50, 100, whatever you want. And the constant that I'm defining for this column is not null. So if user tries to enter a record without entering the name, then he will get an error by PG admin. Next column will be age, which is going to be an integer data type. And for this column, I am defining 2 constraints over here. First is not null, which means the user cannot leave this column details blank. And the second constant is the check constant. It is going to be very straightforward to understand. So within this check constant, I am defining that the age has to be above 5, which means user cannot enter a record or detail of a student whose age is equal to or less than 5. This is the criteria for the students table. And the last column is going to be email, which is again going to be a varchar. Maximum length would be 50, and it is going to be unique because 2 people cannot have the same email ID. So each user will have a unique email ID for everyone. And the second constraint is this also cannot be left null. I'll close the parenthesis over here, and this is the end of the query. So I'll select this entire code and then hit execute. So you can say the code was executed successfully. And now if we go ahead and check within this learning database and go inside schemas, then within this table we should see the new table. And if you still cannot see the new table, like I cannot see over here, all you need to do is select the database and then do a refresh. It is going to refresh the entire information within this database. And now ideally, if I expand this, I can see the newly created table over here. And again, if I'll expand this constants and if I'll drag it to the right a little bit, it says the student ID is the primary key and student age is a check constant. So we have seen and understood how do we create a new table within a database. Now let's go ahead and see that how do we insert values to the newly created table. And before we do that, let's try to see the empty table once. So I'll do a select everything from my table name. As you can see, we have 4 different columns, and if you remember, the student ID column has a serial data type, which means we don't need to enter a value for this. Every time we enter a record, the value will be assigned automatically for this primary key. Now let's go ahead and insert some values to this table. So over here I have some details of a few students who are a big fan of Avengers movie, and I'm trying to enter their details as new records within this students table that we have created. So let's try to see a breakdown for this SQL query. So first I'm saying insert into, and then you mention the table name, then you mention the columns for which you are entering the values. Since we don't have to enter the value for student ID, there are only 3 other columns left for which we need to enter the values. At the next, you will say values, and within each and every parenthesis, you will need to enter the detail for all these 3 columns. And then the details of the next record will be separated by a comma, and this is how I am entering 5 new rows within our table, and details from each row is separated by this comma. In the details I have students name, their age and email IDs. If I'll select and hit execute, it executed successfully. Now let's go ahead and check the table after entering the details. So we can see this time our empty table has some values and this is no longer empty, and this is how we insert new records to an existing table. And now let's go ahead and see that if we want to update the details from an existing table and we want to update the detail from any specific column, then how do we do that? So this is going to be the correct syntax. So you say update, then the table name, and then you use set. After that, you mention the column name for which you want to update the value. So I want to update the age column, and let's say I want to update the age for Peter Parker, who previously mentioned his age as 10 years old, but later on we find out that he's actually 8 years old. So I'll mention here 8, age is equals to 8, where student ID is Peter's student ID, so which is 5, and then end of the query. Remember, if you exclude this particular line and if you only execute first 2 lines, update students and set age is equals to 8, and without applying any filter, what it will do is it will change the age of every student within this table into 8 years. But we don't want that. We want to update the age for one specific student whose student ID is 5. So we mention this last line over here, which kind of applies a filtering for us where the student ID is 5. And if we select and hit execute, the changes has been made successfully. And now if we try to see the details of the table, we can see Peter's age has been updated. And this is how we update the records, we update the values within an existing table. And now let's say due to some reason, since Peter lied to us, we want to suspend him temporarily. So his record needs to be excluded from the table. So let's go ahead and see how do we delete a record from an existing table. This is going to be the syntax for that. So we use delete from table name where student ID is 5 because we are doing it for Peter. We select and hit execute. And now if we check the details, we should not be seeing Peter's detail within the table anymore. And it has been gone. Now as a next topic, let's try to understand about alter. Basically, alter helps us in order to add, drop or rename any column within the table. It also allows you to change the data type for any specific column. Let's say if you have a data type varchar for any particular column and then you want to change the data type into something else, you can do that with the help of alter. It also allows you to set a default value for any specific column. So let's say you want to keep the default value within the age column 18 years for all the students. You can do that with the help of alter command. You can also change the check constraints, and it also allows you to rename the table as well. These are the few ways how we can use the alter command. So in order to add a new column, you use this alter table, then table name, add column, then the new column name that you want to add, and then you specify the type of the column. Similarly, in order to drop a column, you use this. In order to set a default value for an existing column, you do this. In order to drop the default value from an existing column, you use this syntax. If you want to set the constant for a column as not null, you can use this one. And similarly, if you want to drop the not null constant, this can be used. And in order to add a new constant, you go by this. I leave it to you to use all these commands and experiment by yourself in order to learn the alter command. Also, in order to seek some help, you can go to Google search and search for alter in PostgreSQL. And I highly suggest to refer to these first two links. First is from the tutorialspoint.com site, and the second one is from the official website of PostgreSQL. Both these sites have a detailed explanation that how do you go about using the alter command in SQL. So I highly suggest that you have a look on this. And finally, now we will learn that if we want to drop any particular column from the table, how do we do that? So let's go ahead and see how do we use the drop command. So this will be the correct syntax. So you say alter table and then table name, which is students, drop column and column name. So let's say I want to drop the email column because that is no longer in use, and then end of the query. If you want to drop multiple columns within one SQL query, then all you need to do is you add a comma by the end, and in the next line you can add another drop command specifying the next column that you want to drop. Let's say if you want to drop the age column. Okay, but within this example, we will see only by dropping the email column. So I'll select and hit execute. And if I check the details from the table, it should not contain the email column anymore, as you can see over here. So we have seen that how can we use the drop statement in order to drop a column from a table. And PostgreSQL also removes all the indexes and constants associated to the column that you are dropping. But remember, it will not remove the column used in the views or procedures without additional cascade clause. I understand this might be slightly confusing to you because so far within this playlist we have not covered views or procedures. But just try to understand that they are like a replica, a logical replica of the table or the information within the table. And going forward within this tutorial, we will see in details what are they. But let's say if you want to remove the column from views or procedures as well, then along with the drop statement, you will have to use a cascade clause for which the correct syntax will be this. So you say alter table, then table name, drop column, then column name, and then by the end you mention cascade. So this cascade clause will help to drop the column information not only from the table from scratch, but it will also remove the details from all the views or procedures where the detail of that column is reflecting. One more another way of using the drop statement would be mentioning drop column if exists column name. So it checks if the column exists within the table, then only it will drop. Otherwise, no changes will be made to the data. So I hope you found today's lecture useful and you got to learn a lot of new things. If you had difficulties understanding any particular topics from these, then I highly suggest that you watch this video again and the things will be absolutely clear to you. And that's all for today's lecture. Kindly consider supporting the channel by dropping a like below and hitting the subscribe button. Also, let us know your views on this channel and the tutorials that we are bringing for you in the comment section, and we will be very happy to go through it. Thank you very much for your time. See you in the next lecture.